Dehino asmin yatha dehe kaumaram yavvanam jara tatha dehantara praptir dhiras tatranam nihati. The indwelling consciousness in a body-mind organism passes through the stages of childhood, youth and old age. Similarly, the same indwelling consciousness at the death of a body passes on to another body. The wise one is not concerned with this natural phenomenon. The indwelling consciousness referred to in the verse as Behinaha is the impersonal consciousness, which is the same life source in every living creature. This impersonal consciousness is not concerned with the various stages in life through which the body-mind organism passes as a natural process, nor is it concerned with the process beyond death, when it gives up one body and enters into another conception, another body. It is the identified consciousness, the ego, which is very much concerned not only with the various stages in life, especially the loss of youth and the approach of old age, but also beyond death, the fear of the unknown. Matra sparshastu kampeya, shitoshna sukhadukhadaha, agama payino nityaha, tam stitikshasva bharata. Feelings of heat and cold, pleasure and pain are the result of the contact of the senses with their respective objects. They are ephemeral. They come and they go. All you should do is to accept them as such without getting involved in them. It is clear that external objects bring about a reaction in a body-mind organism only when they come in contact with the respective senses. It is also clear that the same object can bring about different reactions in different human organisms. What is attractive for one may not be attractive to another. What seems attractive at one time may also seem oppressive at another time. The point is that reactions of the senses to their respective objects are different and they keep changing. Also, they come and go. When they are seen in this perspective, they lose their influence to cause undue pleasure or pain. One can accept the changes as they occur with equanimity. Vasansi jirnani yatha vihayo, namani grinnhati naroparani, tatha sharirani vihaya jirnani, anyani samyati namani dehi. As a man casts off worn-out garments and dons new ones, so the indwelling consciousness casts off worn-out body-mind organisms and enters into new ones. This oft-quoted verse is very often grossly misinterpreted as under. Just as an individual changes his clothes to suit the convenience of the occasion, so too the ego center discards one physical form and takes to another, which will be most suited for it, to gain the next required type of experiences. This is the misinterpretation. Dehi mentioned in the verse refers not to the ego center, but to the indwelling consciousness, the impersonal consciousness which is the life source of all living creatures. It is this impersonal consciousness which casts off worn-out body-mind equipments and enters into new ones as part of general evolution, not the ego consciousness. Avyaktadini bhutani, vyaktamadhyani bharata, avyakta nidhananyeva, tatra ka paridevana. Beings are not manifest to human senses before birth. During the period between birth and death, they are manifest. They again return to the unmanifest at death. In this natural process, what is there to grieve over? Persons and events appearing in one's dream did not exist before the dream started and will again disappear when the dream ends. No one grieves over this phenomenon. Why then grieve over a similar phenomenon in life, in this living dream? This would seem to be the purpose of this verse. When the potential energy of the unmanifest activized itself into the manifest universe, the manifestation came into existence. When the burst of energy exhausts itself after billions of years, the manifested universe again subsides into the potential energy of the unmanifest, until it activizes itself again. This is a perfectly natural process which should not be of any concern to the man of discernment. Myriad forms of life emerge only to return to a primal non-being before entering again to some form of living, a kind of recycling. Thus nature would seem to be a rhythmic pulsation, ever changing and transforming, coming to birth and dying, and coming to birth again. Wisdom consists in learning conformity to the universal rhythm. Dehi nityam avadhyoyam, dehe sarvasya bharata, tasmat sarvani bhutani, natvam shochitumarhasi. The indwelling consciousness within all living body-mind organisms is forever invulnerable, indestructible. Therefore, there is really no need to mourn for anyone. It is necessary to make a distinction, perhaps subtle, but very necessary, between mourning for someone and reacting emotionally to the loss of a near relative or a dear friend. It is natural for the body-mind organism to react to the loss of someone who has been close to one, especially over a long period. While such a spontaneous reaction is perfectly natural, prolonged mourning or grieving over a period is a matter of involvement of the ego through identification with the body. In other words, while an emotional reaction is perfectly natural, an involvement is a matter of ignorance. Ramana Maharshi was once greatly upset emotionally when a companion over a long period suddenly died. As an explanation, he came out with a very similar view. Nehabhikramanashosti pratyavayo na vidyate svalpamapyasya dharmasya trayate mahato bhayat. In this karma yoga, an attempt is not wasted even if it is an abortive one, nor is there any adverse effect. Even a little knowledge and practice of this yoga protects one from the great fear of death and rebirth. In this verse, Lord Krishna brings out the difference between what happens in the phenomenal working of life and the transcendental effort. While the effort in usual life could be wasted or even bring about an adverse effect, that does not hold good for any effort made in the acquisition of the knowledge and practice of Karma Yoga. A partial effort in raising a crop would be wasted if the process is not duly completed. Also, if a patient takes the wrong medicine, there could be an adverse effect. But the practice of Karma Yoga is on a different footing altogether. The very wanting to undertake the Karma Yoga is because of God's grace. So the progress of the undertaking in the process would also depend on God's grace. But the remarkable thing about this yoga process is that nothing done is ever wasted, nor does it have any adverse effect. The process goes on. The speed of it will depend on the destiny of the individual organism through which the process goes on. Yavanartha udapane sarvatah samplutodake tavan sarveshu vedeshu brahmanasya vijanatah. The Vedas are useful only until the awakening. To the awakened sage, the Brahmana, the Vedas are as useful as a reservoir when there is a flood everywhere. For the spiritual seeker, the Vedas are the prime source of true knowledge, and everyone must go to the sacred book for knowledge, just as the villager must normally go to the well for his daily supply of drinking water. But when the area is flooded, the reservoir itself becomes merged in the spread of water around. Similarly, the Vedas are useful only until the seeker has reached a certain level of understanding, only until the individual is not free from the desire for sensual satisfaction. But to the seeker who has come to experience Brahman, the Brahmana, the knowledge of the Vedas has become submerged in the perfection of the self, which the adept actually lives in practice. Karmanyevadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phalahetur bhuhu ma te sangostva karmani. All you can do is to work for the sake of the work. You have no right to the fruits of the work. That is to say, the consequences of your actions are not in your control. But do not let this fact make you lean towards inaction. This is one of the most quoted of the verses in the Bhagavadgíty, and it is at the same time perhaps the most difficult to accept wholeheartedly. How can the human being act without motivation? And yet this is precisely what he is asked to do. The whole dilemma is based on the misconception that if a man is asked to work without expecting the fruits of his action, he would be inclined not to work. The misunderstanding is based on the belief that a human being has the free will to act or not to act. Nobody likes being told that he has no free will. And yet, look at the state of the world at the present time. The world is on the brink of disaster, where it has been for many years now, with one crisis or another. The question, the big question, therefore remains. The human being certainly has tremendous intelligence, even to send a man to the moon. He is also supposed to have free will. Then why has the human being been unable to combine his intelligence and his free will to make the world a better place? There is also another aspect. There are so many intelligent people, leaders in their respective fields, who are very much interested in knowing their future. If they really believed in their own free will, why would they be so interested in astrology and similar phenomena? If you think along these lines, the only reasonable conclusion you will arrive at is that the human being has been acting in this fashion only because he has no control over his thoughts and emotions. What he considers as his actions are in fact only reactions of the individual organism to an outside impulse. The outside impulse being a thought which occurs, an event that he sees, or perhaps what he happens to hear. Each organism reacts according to the natural characteristics with which it has been programmed: physical, mental, intellectual, and temperamental. Another difficulty about truly accepting this teaching is the argument that it leads to a fatalistic attitude. The fatalistic argument translates itself into the question: if I am not to be motivated by the fruits of my action, and indeed if I have no free will over my actions, Why should I work at all? The answer is astonishingly simple. You will not be able to be inactive for any length of time because the energy within the organism will compel you to act according to the natural characteristics of the organism. In other words, whether to act or not is itself not in your control. Ya nisha sarvabhutanam tasyam jagrati sanyami yasyam jagrati bhutani sa nisha pashyato mune. In the knowledge of the Atman, which is the dark night to the ignorant, the recollected mind is fully awake and aware. The ignorant are awake in the daylight of their sense life, which is darkness to the sage. In this verse are contrasted the view of the world as seen by the identified individual and that of the awakened jnani. To the ignorant individual, whatever is seen by the senses appears real and is taken as real, and only that which is perceived through the senses is real. To the sage, on the other hand, whatever appears is not real. Whatever appears is only the changeable appearance of the unperceived real. In other words, the egocentric, identified individual, fully awake to the world of perception, is asleep to the real, the Atman, lived and enjoyed by the sage. So long as the individual remains in his world of desires, the real, the Atman, remains a total mystery to him. It is only when he realizes that the mind is nothing but a series of desires which never ends, that the possibility occurs of his awakening from the night of identification with the senses into the world of the jnani. Ramana Maharshi said, there are only two things, sleep and creation. There is nothing if you go to sleep. You wake up and there is everything. If you learn to sleep when awake, you can be just a witness. This is the real truth. Na karmanam anarambhat, naishkarmyam purushoshnute, na cha sanyasanadeva, siddhim samadhi gacchati. Abstaining from action is not the way to gain freedom from activity, nor can one achieve perfection by merely ceasing to act. This verse makes a distinction between activity, inactivity, and non-activity. Freedom from activity means not inactivity, but the absence of sense of personal doership. Deliberate inactivity simply means activity in the negative sense, and is at the same level as positive deliberate activity. When activity happens, because the energy within the body-mind organism will not permit the organism to remain idle for any length of time, then such activity is without the sense of personal doership and may therefore be called not action, nor inaction, but non-action. Non-action is action without a sense of personal doership, whereas both deliberate action and deliberate inaction include the sense of personal doership. The essential difference between the kind of activity or lack of activity is whether the sense of personal doership is inherent in such activity or inactivity. It is the absence of the sense of personal doership which leads to perfection, and not the activity or inactivity as such. The Chinese philosophy called Taoism puts this as under. The non-action of the wise man is not inaction. It is not studied. It is not shaken by anything. The sage is quiet because he is not moved, not because he wills to be quiet. The heart of the wise man is tranquil. In other words, from the stillness of the sages comes their non-action, which is indeed effective action because there is no ego involved in such non-action. Nahi kaschit kshanamapi jatu tishthatya karma krup karyate hi avashah karma sarvah prakriti jair gunaihi. Actually, not even for a moment can one remain free of activity, including mental activity, both conscious and subconscious. The energy within the body-mind organism will automatically produce actions according to the natural characteristics of the organism. This verse provides the answer to the usual objection raised against the injunction to act without expecting and wanting the fruits of action, that such an injunction will lead to a fatalistic attitude. That is, a person will have no reason to act at all, and he would therefore be inclined not to act at all. In other words, you may want to desist from action if you cannot have the fruits of your action. But the fact of the matter is that the fruits of the action will depend on the destiny of the organism, whereas the energy within the body-mind organism will continue to produce activity in accordance with the natural characteristics with which the organism was conceived and created. These natural characteristics depend on the genes, the DNA of the organism, and the conditioning that the organism has received from the environment in which it was raised. And the essential fact is that no one has the control either over the DNA or over the environment in which the organism was born. No one can choose one's parents, and by the same token, no one can choose the environment in which one is born and gets conditioned in. Karmendriyani sanyamya yaaste manasa smarant indriyarthan vimudhatma mithyacharasya uchyate. A man who renounces certain physical actions but cannot control his mind from dwelling on the objects of his sensual desire is deceiving himself. Such a man can only be called a hypocrite. It is a matter of fact that it is not very difficult to restrain oneself from doing certain actions, but it is far more difficult to restrain the mind from thinking of the very activities which one has forcibly deprived oneself. Continued practice of such an attitude means self-delusion, and such a man is therefore soon known as a hypocrite. In fact, a hypocrite cannot help exposing himself because the mind that cannot keep out sensuous pleasures naturally assumes a tendency towards such actions, and very soon the individual finds himself engaging in the very activities which he was trying forcibly to avoid. Yas twatmaratireva syat atmatruptascha manavah atmanyeva cha santushta tasya karyam na vidyate naiva tasya kritenartha na kriteneha kaschana nachasya sarvabhuteshu kaschid arthavyapashrayah. A man is no longer obliged to perform any kind of action once he has learned to find delight and satisfaction and peace in the Atman or Self. For such a man, there is nothing to gain in this world by any kind of action, nor does he have anything to lose by refraining from action. He is independent of anybody and anything. To one who has transcended his ego, the routine work during the day is no longer required as self-discipline, but is a natural fulfillment of his self-realization. Such a man of wisdom does not need to work in order to get his material requirements, which go on increasing continuously for the ordinary man. He is perfectly content in the very divine nature that provides eternal satisfaction for him. Where contentment has finally arrived in the very self-realization, desires cannot arise, and in the absence of involvement in the desires, there is no question of any action to satisfy the desires, nor are there any obligatory duties of such a self-realized man, because such duties concern only the man who has desires. Whatever work such a man does just happens without any trace of doership. Such a self-realized man, rooted in the experience of the self, does not have to depend for his satisfaction on any object or person, because he is centered in the eternal subject. Prakritehi kriyamanani gunaihi karmani sarvashah ahankara vimudhatma kartahamiti manyate tatvavittu mahabaho gunakarma vibhagayoho gunaguneshu vartante iti matva na sajjate. It is the energy within the body-mind organism that produces actions according to the natural characteristics of the organism. Man, deluded by his egoism, thinks, I am the doer. But the one who has true insight into the workings of the energy within the organism does not get involved in the actions which are the result of the senses attaching themselves to their respective objects. What an ordinary person considers his actions are really reactions produced by the brain in response to the senses when they meet their respective objects. Thus, when the eyes see something or the ears hear something, the brain reacts to this event according to the natural characteristics of the body-mind organism and produces a reaction. It is this natural reaction to the event which the ordinary man mistakenly considers his action. The wise man, tattvavit, who knows reality, on the other hand, understands what really happens and does not involve himself with whatever happens. In other terms, the wise man considers all events as God's actions and therefore does not judge them as good or bad. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa gave his disciples this simple advice: be absolutely convinced that you are merely a machine which is operated upon by God, and then you may do whatever you want. Sadrisham cheshtate swasyaha prakrite jnanamanapi prakritim yanti bhutani nigrahah kinkarishyati indriyasyarthe ragadveshav vyavasthitav tayorna vashamagachet tavyasya paripanthinam. Even for a wise man, the energy within the body-mind organism produces actions according to his own natural characteristics. All living creatures follow their natural tendencies. What is the use of any external restraint? The attraction and aversion of the senses for their respective objects are natural. Involvement with them should be avoided. That is the obstruction and obstacle. This verse makes it perfectly clear that the body-mind organism produces actions strictly according to the natural character of that organism, physical, mental, temperament. And these actions depend upon the destiny of that organism. Once this is clearly understood, it will be realized that whether self-realization has happened in the organism or not, the body-mind organism will continue to react to an outside impulse, a thought or something seen or something heard or something smelt or touched, and the reaction will be strictly according to the natural characteristics of that organism. The only difference between the wise man and the ordinary man lies in the reaction to that reaction. Whilst the ordinary man will get involved in the natural reaction, the wise man will not. Both the event and the reaction will be merely witnessed without any personal involvement. Shreyan swadharmo viguna paradharma svanushthita swadharme nidhanam shreya paradharmo bhayavaha. It is better to do one's own duty, however imperfectly, than to assume the duties of another, however successfully. It is better to die doing one's own duty. The duty of someone else will bring you into great spiritual danger. The word dharma in Sanskrit has several meanings, and the correct meaning has to be understood in context. Here, the words one's own duty must mean the duty that is relevant to one's own natural characteristics. The duty, the dharma of a flower, is to bloom and emit its fragrance, while most of nature does its duty without any problem. A man's mind plays tricks on him and wants him to decide which dharma he will follow. If a man's natural characteristics are for a man to be an accountant, it would, the verse says, be suicidal to try to be a doctor or a lawyer for other reasons. The verse is addressed to Arjuna and says to him in effect, you are born to be a warrior. You are trained to be a warrior. Your dharma is to fight. Whether you win or lose, even if you die in doing your duty. Arjuna is hereby warned that if he tries to live the quiet and peaceful life of a Brahman, that will be a great spiritual danger. Vitaraga bhaya krodhaha manmaya mamupashritaha bahavo jnana tapasa puta madbhavamagataha. Freed from lust, fear and anger, filled with myself, finding refuge in me, burnt and purified in the blaze of wisdom, many have entered into my being. This verse provides considerable encouragement to the ordinary seeker. It says that by following any path that is appropriate to the natural characteristics of the organism, the path of action or the path of devotion or the path of knowledge, many have reached the final truth, the Absolute. Lord Krishna assures Arjuna that reaching the Absolute, the ultimate being, is not the almost impossible feat that is generally made out to be. Whatever the path followed, it is necessary to lose the sense of doership, which means not getting involved in attachment, fear and anger. Ultimately, what counts is the faith and trust in God or the impersonal reality. Karmanyakarmayah pashet, akarmani cha karmayah, sabuddhiman manusheshu, sayuktah kritsna karma kritam. He who sees the inaction that is in action, and the action that is in non-action, is wise among men. Even when engaged in action, he remains in the equanimity of the self. Those who are caught in the machinery of money and power take no joy except in activity and change. Whenever an occasion for action arises, they feel compelled to act. They cannot in their ignorance help themselves. They are inexorably moved like the machine of which they are a part. Prisoners in the world of phenomenality, what else can they do but submit to the demands of matter? The heart of the wise man is tranquil. As a Taoist sage has put it, it is the mirror of heaven and earth, the glass of everything. Emptiness, stillness, tranquility, tastelessness, silence, non-action. This is the level of heaven and earth. This is perfect Tao. Wise men find here their resting place. Resting, they are empty. It is from the sage's emptiness that stillness arises, and from stillness, action that is non-action. Yasya sarve samarambhaha kama sankalpa varjitaha jnanagni dagdha karmanam tamahuh panditam buddhaha. The sages say truly he is wise who acts without lust or scheming for the fruits of the acts. The acts do not affect him, for they are melted in the wisdom of my knowledge. This verse again stresses the importance of the sage's action that is so natural that it seems like inaction. In reality, it is action that is non-action. The Taoist sage has put it in the following words: "The man in whom thou acts without impediment harms no other being by his actions. Yet he does not know himself to be kind, to be gentle. The man in whom thou acts without impediment does not bother with his own interests and does not despise others who do. He does not struggle to make money and does not make a virtue of poverty. He goes his way without relying on others and does not pride himself on walking alone. Brahmarpanam Brahma Havihi Brahmagno Brahmana Hutam Brahmaiva Tena Gantavyam Brahma Karma Samadhina." Brahman is the ritual. Brahman is the offering. Brahman is he who makes the offering to the fire that is Brahman. If in every action a man recognizes Brahman, he will verily be absorbed into Brahman. This verse is chanted by Hindu monks as grace before meals, the fire being regarded as the fire of hunger, Jataragni. The metaphor in this verse refers to the well-known ritual of the Vedas, that is the yajna. In every yajna, there are 4 essential factors: the deity invoked to whom the oblation is offered, the fire in which the oblation is poured, the material that constitutes the offering, and the individual who is performing the yajna. The significance of the chanting of the verse as grace before meals is that the consumption of food is a necessity for all, including the wise one or the sage. The point is that the wise one thinks of the act of consuming food as jnana yajna. The food, the eater of it, the digesting of it, are all modifications of Brahman, just as the waves are part of the ocean. Yat sankhyaih prapyate sthanam tad yogairapi gamyate eka sankhyacha yogacha yah pashyati sapashyati. The wise ones who see knowledge and action as one have the true understanding. Either path leads to the same end. There the followers of Karma Yoga meet the seekers after knowledge in equal freedom. In this verse, Lord Krishna categorically declares that neither the Jnana Yoga nor the Karma Yoga, neither the path of knowledge nor the path of action, is the sole way to emancipation. One can reach the goal by either path. Most seekers want to know the best path to salvation. This is a misconception based on the erroneous belief that one's path is a matter of choice. The fact of the matter is that one has not chosen to be a seeker. One is a seeker because that is his destiny and because God has willed it. The natural characteristics of the body-mind organism, over which one has had no control, decide what one shall seek. In other words, it is God's will that will decide whether one will seek money and power or salvation. The spiritual seeker thus need not feel himself to be superior to someone who is seeking material things. To take the argument a step further, if the seeking itself has not been a matter of our choice, how can the path be a matter of our choice? Our destiny and the natural characteristics of our body-mind organisms will naturally dictate what path we shall take. God's will direct us towards the path we are to follow. It is therefore a matter of great satisfaction to the seeker that any path will lead to the same goal. Naiva kinchit karomiti yukto manyeta tattvavit pashyan shrunvan sprashan jighan ashnan gachan swapan shwasan pradapan visrujan prahan unmishan nimishannapi indriyanindriyartheshu vartanta iti dharayan. The sage centered in Brahman has the constant underlying thought, I am doing nothing. He is totally firm in the thought that the senses react to the sense objects, no matter what he sees, hears, touches, smells, eats. It matters not whether he is moving, sleeping, breathing, speaking, excreting, or grasping something with his hand, or opening or closing his eyes. He knows that he is doing nothing at all. This verse emphasizes the fact that the essential feature of self-awareness or enlightenment or awakening is the total annihilation of the sense of doership in whatever activity that is being produced through the body-mind organism. Says Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, he who comes to know that he is only an instrument in the hands of the Lord has no egoistic feeling. He is aware that he is only a tool with which God has his work done. Such a man causes harm to nobody. The poison of egoism is no more in him. A steel knife becomes a gold knife with the touch of the philosopher's stone. Though the form of the knife is there, it is not useful anymore for cutting. Similarly, the jnani retains a seeming individuality, but no ignorance-born activity occurs in and through him. Nadatte kasyachit papam, nachaiva sukritam vibhuh, ajnane navritam jnanam, tena muhyanti jantavah. The omnipresent Lord does not take note of the merit or demerit of anyone. What is always perfect. The light of the Atman is covered by the darkness of delusion, and that is how the human beings are deluded. This verse firmly demolishes the concept of a God sitting somewhere in the clouds, peeping down and keeping a perfect account of every sin and every good deed done by every single human being, so that an individual may be punished or rewarded in due course. It should be clear that such a concept is steeped in ignorance. Such a concept cannot prevail if one is totally convinced that no action can happen unless God wills it. If God's will is totally accepted, one's personal will cannot exist, and therefore there cannot be any question of any sin or merit. Such a concept is bound to evoke immediately an argument such as this: if it is God's will that I should commit a murder, why should I be punished for it? The answer is astonishingly simple. There is no you to be punished or rewarded. It was God's will and the destiny of that human organism that the murder would be committed. And it is also God's will and the destiny of that organism to be punished for the act if he is so punished. Bandhuratmatmanastasya yenapmaivatmana jitaha anatmanastu shatrutve varpetatmaiva shatruvat. Man's will and intention is the only friend of the Atman. It is the same will and intention which acts as the enemy. For when a man is self-controlled, his will acts as the friend of the Atman. The same will of a man who has not subdued his base self acts like an enemy. This verse clearly brings out the influence which the sense of personal doership has on the psyche of the individual. To the extent that an individual feels himself to be in control over his destiny, that it is his free will which will dictate his future in this world. His will and intention, his mind, will be his enemy. The same mind will be a friend to him who truly believes and accepts that the only will that can prevail at any time is God's will, that he himself is merely an instrument operated upon by God. It is a matter of either a total surrender to God or a strong sense of personal choice, personal doership, and personal responsibility. One is knowledge, the other is ignorance. Yo mam pashyati sarvatra, sarvam cha mai pashyati, tasyaham na pranashyami, sacha me na pranashyati, sarvabhuta sthitam yo mam, bhajatyekatvamasthitah, sarvatha vartamanopi, sayogi mai vartate. The yogi who sees me in all things, and all things within me, will never lose sight of me, nor do I ever become lost to him. He is established in union with me, and worships me devoutly as existing in all beings. Such a yogi always abides in me, whatever may be his mode of living. What this verse says in essence is that while the universe appears as diversity, essentially all is unicity, and it is the yogi, the wise man, who sees this truth behind the apparent universe and thus becomes one with the unicity. Noumenon and phenomena, potential energy and activized energy, thought and action are essentially one in unicity and are dual only in phenomenality. The ocean remains the same, whether or not there are waves on its surface. It is as if the ocean sports with the waves in a sportive mood. Similarly, energy activates its self-potentiality into the actuality of phenomenal life. But essentially they are not two. Unmanifest noumenon, in a burst of love energy, becomes the phenomenal manifestation, life and living as we know it. But essentially there is only unicity. When the love play is over, when the burst of energy is exhausted, the manifested phenomena merge with the unmanifest noumenon in unicity. As the Bhagavatam puts it, as the spider weaves its thread out of its own mouth, plays with it, and then withdraws it again into itself, so the external unchangeable Lord, who is without form, without attributes, who is absolute knowledge and absolute bliss, evolves the whole universe out of himself, plays with it for a while, and again withdraws it into himself. The one who really sees this truth realizes his own nature as the self. Manushyanam sahasreshu kaschit yatati siddhaye yatatam api siddhanam kaschin mam vetti tatvatah. It is perhaps only one in thousands of beings who strives for freedom. And amongst those who strive for freedom, hardly one knows the total truth of my being. Without a certain innate, God-given intuitive insight, it is so easy to misunderstand many verses in the Bhagavadgíty. It is thus possible to misinterpret this verse as Lord Krishna shifting the entire responsibility for not realizing the self upon the individual seeker himself, and attributing the failure to the seeker's lack of self-application. But it must be realized that whatever anyone seeks must be seen as the seeking happening through an individual human organism as its God-given destiny. Then it will be seen that there is truly no individual seeker who could be proud of being a spiritual seeker. If someone seeks money and power, it is because God wants him to do so. If a man seeks spirituality, again, it is because there is God's grace. This verse is to be seen as Lord Krishna stating the fact of the matter, how rare it is for someone to seek freedom and perfection, and how much rarer it is for someone to ultimately know the total truth. On the other hand, the Lord has already assured the seeker, verse number 10 in chapter 4, that freed from lust, fear and anger, filled with myself, finding refuge in me, burnt and purified in the blaze of wisdom, many have entered into my being. The point is that it is not every seeker who can aspire for total perfection. It is a matter of divine will. All he can do is to accept this divine will and not let his desire for freedom itself become an obstruction. What this means is that the seeker must surrender to God's will in regard to the entire process of awakening. That he is a seeker is itself because of God's grace. Surrender to this grace and leave everything to that will. A similar encouragement is voiced by Ramana Maharshi when he tells the seeker, "Your head is already in the tiger's mouth. There is no escape." In other words, why be impatient? Bhumirapo nalo vayo kham mano buddhirevacha ahankara itiyam me bhinna prakritirashtada apareyamitastvanyam prakritim vidhi me param jiva bhutam mahabaho yayedam dharyate jagat. My prakriti is of eightfold composition: earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intellect, and the ego. Bear this in mind, that behind this, and quite distinct from it, is that perennial principle which is the source of life and the sustenance of the universe, consciousness in all beings. This verse provides the distinction between the manifest material universe and the perennial principle which, immanent within it, provides the life and the sustenance to this universe. The material manifest universe is just a sudden, spontaneous, concurrent appearance in consciousness, within consciousness, brought about by consciousness. Consciousness is all there really is. Other than consciousness, nothing is. In the material manifestation, the human being is just one object. Basically, there is no difference in the makeup of the human being and the inanimate object. The question, therefore, of the individuality of the human being is really a myth. In principle, therefore, the human being is merely a dreamed character in this dreamed manifestation, just another object with senses which enable him to perceive things and cognize and interpret and discriminate between what he perceives. If he sees the impersonality in all this, that he is just another object in the manifestation with certain additional endowments like sentience and intellect, that would be the first step in perceiving the impersonality of the whole manifestation. In seeing the impersonality of the manifested universe, there is the inherent understanding that whatever has appeared as a mere appearance cannot possibly have an existence of its own. That consciousness is the perennial principle which is the source of life and the sustenance of the universe. Ye chaiva satvika bhavaha rajasas tamasaschayi matta eveti tan vidhi natvaham teshu te mayi tribhir gunamayair bhavaihi ebhi sarvamidam jagat mohitam nabhijanati mamebhyah paramavyayam. You must realize that anything that belongs to the states of sattva, rajas and tamas, all must proceed from me. They are contained in me, but I am not in them. It is by the moods and mental states, the expression of the three gunas, that the entire world is deluded. Thus the world fails to recognize me as I really am, supreme and deathless. I stand apart from them all. The individual human body-mind mechanism is really nothing but an individual pattern of dynamic energy. That is all an individual is. Energy vibrating and pulsating at an incredible speed in a particular pattern. And that pattern has characteristics peculiar to that particular body-mind organism. No human being has natural characteristics quite like any other. The scriptures refer to this combination of characteristics as dharma, the original nature. Indeed, in another verse, Lord Krishna tells Arjuna to act according to his original nature. To follow one's dharma, even imperfectly done, is better than following another's dharma more efficiently. He adds that following someone else's dharma is spiritually dangerous. The Arabian sage Monoimus says, "Learn whence is sorrow and joy, and love and hate, and the waking though one would not, and sleeping though one would not, and falling in love though one would not. And if thou shouldst closely investigate all these phenomena, thou wilt find God in thyself, one and many, just as the atom, thus finding in thyself a way out of thyself." Bahunam janmanamante jnanavan mam prapadyate Vasudeva sarvamiti samahatma sudurlabha. With his discrimination ripening through many a long life, the man of wisdom makes me his refuge, knows that Vasudeva, Brahman, is all there is. How rare is such a great one. The sage Ashtavakra tells us what bondage is and what liberation is. He says, it means bondage when the mind desires something or grieves at something. It means liberation when the mind does not desire or grieve, does not accept or reject, does not feel happy or unhappy. Now the human mind, trained and conditioned as it is incapable of realizing that the non-desiring includes desiring the knowledge of your true nature. Desire does not mean only desiring some object, but includes the desire for freedom from bondage or self-realization. Wherever there is desire, there must be the individual me doing the desiring, and therefore it is bondage. Ashtavakra also says, it means bondage when the mind is attached to any sense experience. It is liberation when the mind is detached from all sense experience. The mind is the me, the ego, who is attached to sense experiences. How does the me, the personal identification, arise? In the process of manifestation and its functioning. For this God's game or Leela to take place, for the love and hate relationships to arise, consciousness or God identifies itself with each individual organism and creates the me who desires or grieves for something, who attaches himself to the same experiences. When there is the sudden realization that this me is only a concept which does not really exist, that the identification with the organism as a separate entity disappears. Lord Krishna says that this process of the creation of the me and its destruction, which means liberation from the bondage of identification and attachment, takes many lifetimes. Ultimately, there is the sudden realization that all there is consciousness, that all that has happened and is happening and will happen is only because of God's will and not because of the efforts of the fictitious me. This sudden realization, itself because of God's will, as God's grace, means enlightenment or awakening. Antakalecha mameva smaran muktva kalevaram yah prayati samadbhavam yasti nastyatra samshayah. If at the time of death, when a man drops his body, he departs with his consciousness absorbed in me alone, he will be united with my being. There is no doubt about this. The Taoist sage Wang Po has an interesting statement which has context to this verse. Wang Po says, if an ordinary man, when he is about to die, could only see the 5 elements of consciousness as void, the 4 physical elements as not constituting a me, the real mind as formless and neither coming nor going, his nature as something neither commencing at his birth nor perishing at his death, but as whole and motionless in its very depths, his mind and environment objects as one. If he could really have this happen, he would receive enlightenment in a flash. He would no longer be entangled by the triple world. He would be a world transcender. If he should behold the glorious sight of all the Buddhas coming to welcome him, surrounded by every kind of gorgeous manifestation, he would feel no desire to approach them. If he should behold all sorts of horrific forms surrounding him, he would experience no terror. He would just be himself, oblivious of conceptual thought and one with the Absolute. This is the fundamental principle. Parastasmattu bhavonya avyakto vyaktat sanatanaha yasya sarveshu bhuteshu nashyatsu na vinashyati avyaktoksara ityukta tamahuh paramam gatim iram yam prapya na nivartante taddhama paramam mama. Behind the manifest and the unmanifest, which concerns phenomenality, there is another nominal awareness, which is eternal and changeless. This is not dissolved in the general cosmic dissolution. This imperishable, unmanifest awareness is said to be the highest state of being. Those who reach it do not return. Saint Jnaneshwar, in his Anubhavamrita, Experience of Immortality, refers to this point. The arising of consciousness, I am, on the original state of the plenum or pure potentiality, when awareness was not aware of itself. It is only when the sense of presence, I am, arises on the original primal state of unicity that consciousness concurrently comes into movement and brings forth upon itself the totality of manifestation. The movement of consciousness also simultaneously brings about the concepts of knowledge, vidya, I am, the sense of impersonal presence, and also ignorance, avidya, when the impersonal consciousness or presence becomes identified with each sentient being as a separate entity. The unicity of the potential plenum, the I subject, gets dichotomized in the process of manifestation as subject and object. Each object considering itself as the pseudo-subject, observer, vis-a-vis all other observed objects. This itself, the individual entitification, is the conceptual bondage of the individual as a separate entity. And liberation consists in the realization that our true nature is the impersonal consciousness and not the individual body-mind organism with which consciousness had identified itself. When such a realization, the transformation or paravritti occurs, the pseudo-subject ceases to be an object and becomes void by the superimposition of the opposites, subject-object, over each other. And through this void or nothingness, the pseudo-subject returns to the original subjectivity, which is the potential plenum. Jnaneshwar explains that the Absolute, the noumenon subject, cannot be an object to itself or to anyone else. And this is the very reason for its primal beingness. It is the eternal subject, the substratum, which manifests itself objectively by extending itself in conceptual space-time so that it may become perceptible as phenomenal objects. This total potentiality, the I subject, cannot offer itself for comprehension because it would then be an object. The I can see everything else, but it cannot see itself. Rajavidya Rajaguhyam Pavitramidamuttamam Pratyakshavagam Dharmyam Susukham Kartumavyayam Maya Tatamidam Sarvam Jagadavyakthamurtina Matsthani Sarvabhutani Nachaham Teshvavasthitaha. This is the knowledge above all other, the sovereign secret, the ultimate purifier. Its virtue is great, its practice relatively easy, and it is made plain only to the eye of the mystic. Thus is man brought to the truth eternal. The entire universe is pervaded by me, in that eternal form of mine which is not manifest to the senses. Although I am not within any creature physically, all creatures exist within me. Lord Krishna in this verse calls Advaita as the sovereign knowledge, the sovereign secret by which man is brought to the ultimate eternal truth. Self-inquiry is relatively easy because it does not entail any formal observance of any physical or mental discipline for a prescribed period of time. It can be apprehended directly by an immediate experience of the self. And once this is experienced directly, the sense of personal doership, the me, is totally annihilated for all time. This sovereign method is a great purifier because it does not entail any strenuous disciplines, and yet it internally purifies the seeker. It is, however, not available to all. It is made plain only to the eye of the mystic, only to those who have the receptivity to this teaching. Those whose nature inclines them towards the seeking material gain or power will not even be interested in seeking the self. This teaching, that the entire universe is pervaded by Him in that eternal form not manifest to the senses, is thus not available to those whose dharma, whose set of natural characteristics does not permit them to be open to this teaching. As Saint Jnaneshwar has put it, this teaching will be available only to him who is able to see his face without the aid of the mirror. Finally, Lord Krishna says in this verse that He is not within any creature, but that all creatures exist within Him. In this one line, Lord Krishna expresses the simultaneous principles of immanence and transcendence. All creatures are part of the reflection or manifest expression of the unmanifest. The unmanifest, therefore, is immanent in all creatures. But at the same time, the unmanifest transcends all creation. The substance can exist without the shadow, but the shadow cannot exist without the substance. The substance, therefore, is immanent in the shadow and at the same time transcends the shadow. Yo mam ajamanadim cha vetti lokamaheshwaram asammudhas samarteshu sarva papaihi pramuchyate. The one who knows me as being birthless, without beginning, Lord of the universe, He alone among mortals, is stainless of sin, unvexed by delusion. The one who knows me refers not to someone who thinks he believes in God or in the impersonal noumenon, who is immanent in the manifest universe, at the same time transcending it. The knowing means a total and in-depth apprehension, a total acceptance in God, not just a pious belief in God. Such in-depth apprehension means a total faith that all that happens is God's will, that no human being can have his own free will to be master of his own destiny. This also means an acceptance a total acceptance of whatever God does in His infinite wisdom, without any judging according to one's own standards of fair play or justice. You will be judging not the body-mind organism through which God's action has been created, but God Himself if you judge anything that happens in the world according to your standards. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa said, "Be absolutely certain, accept totally that you are a machine which is operated upon by God, and then do whatever you like. Whatever you like at any time will be strictly according to the natural characteristics with which God has endowed your organism. So whatever you like at any time and do it must necessarily be part of God's action, irrespective of the fact that you think it is your action. If you truly accept that all actions are God's actions, how can you even involve yourself with the concept of a sin?" It is precisely from this point of view that Lord Krishna says, "He alone among mortals, who is full of conviction that everything happens by God's will, is stainless of sin, unvexed by delusion, the delusion of a sense of personal doership." Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mam upayanti te tesham evanukampartham ahamajnanajam tamah nashayamyatma bhavastha jnanadipena bhasvata. To them, always aware of their Lord and ever devoted, the strength and depth of their devotion brings forth from me the yoga of discrimination, which illumines and guides them towards me. By the grace of my compassion, there in the ignorant heart where I dwell, I become the brilliant lamp of knowledge, dispelling the darkness of ignorance. It is normally not possible for the human being, whose natural inclination is love and devotion to God, the bhakti path, to apprehend directly the sovereign secret to which Lord Krishna has referred in verse 2 in the 9th chapter, the ultimate purifier. So he says in these two verses that when the devotion of the devotees reaches great intensity and only the devotion and love to God remains, without even the individuality of the devotee, then he instills in them the necessary receptivity, the buddhi yoga, the yoga of discrimination, which leads them to the direct experience of the imperishable self, the ultimate purifier, when the sense of personal doership is totally annihilated. To be a seeker is itself a matter of God's grace, and the further progress in the process is obviously also a matter of God's grace. When the dark ignorance is destroyed by the lamp of knowledge, through the buddhi yoga, the yoga of knowledge and discrimination, the self stands revealed in its own glory as the one without a second, all-pervading in its fullness. This ultimate happening is entirely a matter of God's grace, and not something achievable by the devotee through his own efforts. Aham atma gudakeshe sarvabhutashaya sthitah aham adishcha madhyam cha bhutanam anta eva cha. I am the Atman that dwells in the heart of every mortal creature. I am the beginning, I am the lifespan, and I am the end of all beings. This is the central theme of the Bhagavadgíty, and Lord Krishna states this in forceful, unmistakable terms. The meaning is very clear and is one of the verses on which meditation could well be based with much success. Kalosmi loka kshayakrit pravruddha lokan samahartumiha pravritta rute pitvam na bhavishyanti sarve yeva sthita pratyanikeshu yodhaah tasmat tvamuttishta yasholabhasu jitva shatrun bhungshva rajyam samruddham mayaivaite nihatah purmameva Nimittamatram bhavasavyasachim. I am come as time, the ultimate waster of the people, ready for the hour that ripens to their doom. The warriors, arrayed in hostile armies facing each other, shall not live, whether you strike or stay your hand. Therefore, arise and fight. Win kingdom, wealth and glory. Merely be the apparent instrument for their end. They have already been slain by me, O ambidextrous bowman. Everything that is born or created must end. This is the law of nature. And in the process, human beings become the apparent reasons and instruments. In fact, they have nothing to do other than being mere instruments. They have no free will or choice. In this verse, Lord Krishna tells Arjuna specifically that although Arjuna thinks in terms of himself being the killer and the enemies the ones he would kill, actually, he as time has already killed them. There is no need for Arjuna to feel any regret. Arjuna's unhappiness stems from his feeling of personal doership. And here again, the Lord reminds Arjuna that never can he be anything but an apparent instrument for anything that happens as part of the functioning of totality. In subtle terms, the Lord tells Arjuna not to question the functioning of totality, to enjoy the kingdom, wealth and glory that is his destiny, never forgetting that these too will be the subject to the ultimate demolition and annihilation due to the efflux of time. I am time, says Krishna. That is to say, time is a concept as part of the concept of space-time, which came along with the manifestation on the arising of consciousness. For manifestation to happen, the concept of space is necessary for the objects to be constructed. Time is necessary for these manifested objects to be observed. In other words, space-time is a necessary adjunct of manifestation as such. Shreyo hi jnanam abhyasat, jnanat dhyanam vishishyate, dhyanat karma phalatyagaha, tyaga shantiranantaram. Concentration, practiced with discernment, is certainly better than the mechanical repetition of a ritual or a prayer. Absorption in God throughout the day, keeping Him in your heart always, is even better than concentration. But above all, renunciation, the shedding of the sense of doership and of the expectation of the fruits of action, brings instant peace to the spirit. Every seeker at one time or another is plagued by the question as to which spiritual practice he should follow. He does not realize that actually he does not have the free will to choose any particular spiritual practice. He must have the natural tendency towards that particular practice. Otherwise, the effort would be wasted. Nevertheless, the question remains about which practice is the best. Here Lord Krishna gives the answer. It may be that a particular aspirant, for various reasons and circumstances, is only able to repeat continuously for a certain length of time a particular ritual or a prayer. Even that, in the circumstances, would be good enough, better than nothing. Because as the Lord has stressed in an earlier verse, no spiritual practice can ever be wasted. But instead of mere mechanical repetition, if there is a certain concentration of the mind, it would be even better. Better than concentration would be absorption in God throughout the day. Absorption in God throughout the day does not mean to the exclusion of all other activity, which would be most impractical. What is meant is that you should keep Him in your heart always. This means a true conviction that all there is God or totality, which prevails all the time. But above all, says the Lord, the shedding of the sense of doership is ultimately the absolute necessity. So long as there is a sense of personal doership, I am doing the practice of repeating the prayer, I am invoking God, or I am doing the meditation, the practice would be of a lower order. Only when there is the deepest conviction that all there is consciousness, that only God's will prevails, and there can be no personal will or effort, only then will peace prevail. उपद्रष्टानुमन्ता च भर्ता भोक्ता महेश्वरः परमात्मेति चाप्युक्तः देहेऽस्मिन् पुरुषः परः य एवं वेत्ति पुरुषं प्रकृतिं च गुणैः सह सर्वथा वर्तमानोऽपि न स भूयोऽभिजायते. The Supreme Brahman, Purusha, in the body is also called the witness. He makes all our actions happen, sanctions them as it were, experiencing all our experiences. He is the infinite being, the Supreme Atman. He who has experienced this Purusha, the Brahman, directly and realized it as none other than Prakriti and the Gunas, will not be reborn, irrespective of how he has lived his life. Noumenon and the phenomena, the unmanifest and the manifested universe, Shiva and Shakti, Purusha and Prakriti, are what might be called the parents of the universe, the original interrelated or polaric opposites. The one conceives the total potential, and the other the totality of what is sensorially perceptible. The important point is that they are only apparently different, but that they include each other, and as such are not really different. They are the opposite aspects of what would remain in the mutual negation of what is conceived. That which is prior to the conceiving process, or prior to the arising of consciousness. Take away all that appears to be, all that is sensorially perceptible, all that is an effective reaction like likes and dislikes, and all that remains is pure subjectivity without any trace of objectivity. As Saint Jnaneshwar has so well put it, apart from these two, nothing exists in this world. And as Purusha is asleep, it is only Prakriti that is active in the world and is in charge of the working of the world, just as the housewife takes charge of the household in the absence of the husband. The husband, however, is aware of what is going on as the witness. In other words, the entire multiplicity of phenomena in this world has no existence on its own, because they are only an appearance in the consciousness in movement. When the consciousness in movement forgets its universal or impersonal nature, Purusha is asleep and proceeds to identify itself with each of the many sentient objects. The sentient object assumes a pseudo-subjectivity and a sense of doership, takes charge of the working of the world. Jnaneshwar further goes on to explain, these two, Shiva and Shakti, find their oneness in their original unicity and acquire their duality only for the sake of the conceptual manifestation. These two become subject and object to each other, but both are subjectivity in their unicity. The difference between Shiva and Shakti is merely in name and form. They are of the same essential substance. The duality in the world is only notional, like similar fragrance out of two flowers from the same plant or the same sight from the two eyes. It is interesting to note the remarks of Ramakrishna Paramahamsa in this respect. The universe has come into being as a result of the union between the Purusha and the Prakriti. The master of the family is seated somewhere absorbed in thought. The housewife busies herself and attends to all the details of the household affairs. Now and then, she acquaints her husband with what is taking place and seeks his counsel when necessary. The husband approves of what has taken place and suggests what should happen next. It is in this way that the Purusha and Prakriti function. When this position is deeply apprehended, says Lord Krishna, the process of awakening is complete and needs no other lives for completion, in addition to the body-mind organism, through which this final awakening has taken place. Again, it is interesting to note the remarks in this context of Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. When the unburnt pots get damaged, the potter makes new pots out of them. But when a pot burnt in the kiln breaks, the broken pieces are no longer required. Similarly, a life in ignorance needs another life for further processing. But that man whose karma is burnt out by the fire of knowledge has completed the process. He enters the Absolute. प्रकृत्यैव च कर्मणि क्रियमाणानि सर्वशः यः पश्यति तथात्मानम् अकर्तारं स पश्यति यदा भूतपृथग्भावम् एकस्थमनुपश्यति तत एव च विस्तारं ब्रह्म सम्पद्यते तदा अनादित्वान् निर्गुणत्वात् परमात्मायमव्ययः शरीरस्थोऽपि कौन्तेय न karoti न लिप्यते. That man truly sees, who perceives all actions performed by all body-mind organisms as having happened because of Prakriti. He sees the Atman as being actionless. He who sees the entire variety of beings as resting in the One, united in Brahman, brought forth in evolution from Brahman alone, finds Brahman himself. The infinite Atman, without beginning, beyond the gunas, is not subject to change and is imperishable. Therefore, though it dwells in body as its life force, it neither acts nor is tainted by the actions or their consequences. These verses are important but self-explanatory and need no elaboration. Daivi sampad vimokshaya nibandhaya surimata ma shuchas sampadam daivim abhijatosi pandava. The birthright of the divine nature leads to liberation. The birthright of the demonic nature leads to greater bondage. Grieve not, O Arjuna, your birthright is divine. The process from the total identification with the body-mind organism as a separate entity with free will and independence of action, a selfish and totally self-centered individual, to the total disidentification with the organism due to the unequivocal acceptance of God's will in everything that happens, a conviction that the individual organism is merely an instrument at the total disposal of God's will. This process is a long and arduous one. And the fact remains that this process itself is an impersonal one in which the individual, as a mere instrument, has no freedom of action. The totality of this situation makes one fearful of knowing where one stands in this long and arduous process. Arjuna is precisely in this situation, and the good Lord, fully conscious of this fact, hastens to assure Arjuna, because of his compassion, that he has no cause to be despondent. The very fact that he is a seeker after truth, which is itself in God's grace, should assure him that his birthright is divine. He is well ahead in the phenomenal process, from the darkness of ignorance to the light of true knowledge. Sattvanurupa sarvasya shraddha bhavati bharata shraddhamayoyam purusha yo yat shraddhassa eva saha. The faith of each individual is in accordance with his natural temperament. The man is indeed no different from the faith itself. Whatever his faith is, he is. Every human organism is conceived and created with certain given characteristics: physical, mental, intellectual, temperamental. No person has any choice or control concerning his parents and therefore in what environmental condition he would be born. In other words, no person has any choice over his genes. nor does he have any choice over the conditioning he would get in the environment in which he is born. Therefore, it is a fact that he has no choice over either his genes or his environmental conditioning. And the genes plus the conditioning is the basic cause of a person's personality, his psyche, based on his natural characteristics as developed by the environmental conditioning. His faith, his outlook on life and living, will therefore also be based on these factors. This faith will make a person behave in accordance with his natural characteristics. In other words, a human being is a programmed instrument at the will of God. If God wants to produce a certain action through a particular human organism, all he has to do is to send an impulse, a thought, or a feeling, or he has to make the organism see something or hear something or smell something, and the brain will react to the outside impulse or event strictly according to the natural characteristics, according to the man's faith. This natural reaction of the programmed organism is usually considered by an individual as his action. Thus, whatever the faith is, the individual is. Nahi dehabhrita shakyam tyaktam karmanya sheshatah yastu karma phalatyagi satyagi tyabhidiyate. It is indeed impossible for an embodied being to renounce action entirely, but he who has renounced the fruits of action is said to be truly non-attached. In this verse, Lord Krishna clearly brings out the difference between renunciation of action and renunciation of the fruits of action. The word renunciation usually means, for the average person, renouncing, giving up action. But giving up action is an impossibility because the energy within the organism will not allow the organism to remain idle for any length of time. Even if a yogi went into samadhi, the energy within the body will bring him back to earth some time or the other. The one who is truly non-attached is the one who is not concerned with the fruits of actions. And the ordinary person, fully identified with the organism as a separate entity, would never be able to renounce the fruits of action, and he would consider himself entitled to the fruits of his action. The only way the renunciation of the fruits of action can happen is when the deepest intuitive understanding happens that no action can ever be the individual's action, that all actions are in fact reactions of the body-mind organism to the outside impulse according to its natural characteristics. Yasya naham kruto bhava buddhir yasya na lipyate hatvapi saiman lokan nahanti na nibadhyate. No act will create any bondage for him whose mind is free of attachment and whose understanding is untainted by the ego. Although he slay these thousands, he does not kill, nor is he bound by the action. Lord Krishna repeatedly assures Arjuna that he will attract sin for actions only if he assumes doership for these acts, but that if he should be truly convinced and approach the truth that his enemies have already been slain by the Lord in his capacity as Almighty Time, and that he, Arjuna, would only be an apparent cause and instrument of their death, then no possible taint of sin would accrue to him. In this verse again, he reiterates the same point. Sarvabhuteshu yenaikam bhavam avyayamikshate avibhaktam vibhakteshu tadjnanam vidhi satvikam. That knowledge is sattvika, pure, by which the one imperishable being, the deathless, is seen in all existences in the midst of all the diversity. What has appeared as manifestation is merely a kind of reflection of the basic ground, call it consciousness at rest, God, or whatever. Seeing the oneness not only in the immense variety in the manifestation, but between the manifest and the unmanifest, is what is really meant by enlightenment or awakening. Once the individual forgets this oneness, not only between the manifestation as in its diversity, but also between the manifest and unmanifest. Then he begins to think in terms of his individuality and his personal security. Once he begins to think in terms of personal security, he creates any number of problems for himself. So at that level, the first step in understanding the nature of the human being would be that there can be no such thing as security for the individual, that movement and change are the very basis of life and living. This understanding is the basis of understanding life, to go back into the impersonality of life, in which the individual is merely an instrument. Such understanding is sattvika, or pure knowledge. Niyatam sangarahitam, aragad dveshatah kritam, aphala prepsuna karma, yat tat sattvika muchyate. That action is said to be sattvika, pure, which is spontaneous and natural, done without attachment, neither for pleasure nor out of compulsion, by one who is not concerned with the fruit of action. Such an action is called sattvika. The previous verse explained what knowledge was sattvika or pure. In this verse is explained what action is considered sattvika or pure. That action is pure in which there is no sense of personal doership, and in which there is no concern for the reward of the action. When there is no concern for the consequences of the action, because there is personal involvement, there is neither a sense of achievement if the action is successful, nor a sense of guilt or failure if the action is not considered successful. Such an attitude is possible only if there is the full realization that any action which a person considers his or her action is in fact only a reaction of the organism to an outside impulse, be it a thought or something seen or something heard or whatever, and that such reaction is based entirely on the natural characteristics of that particular organism. In other words, such an attitude is possible only if there is the deepest conviction that the individual human being is merely an instrument through which God brings about such action as He thinks fit, according to the destiny of that organism and the universal plan. One is again reminded of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa's declaration, "Be totally convinced that you are merely a machine that is operated upon by God, and then you may do whatever you like." Shreyan swadharmo vigunah paradharma svanushtita svabhavaniyatam karma kurvan apnoti kilbisham. Better is one's own dharma, though imperfect, than the dharma of another better performed. He who does the duty ordained by his own nature incurs no sin. Here again, Lord Krishna impresses upon Arjuna the importance of realizing that ultimately it is one's own nature, one's own dharma that will prevail. To try to go against nature is dangerous. To act according to one's nature, to accept that whatever happens is the will of God, is to go with the flow. To swim against the current is both difficult and hazardous, though at first sight it might seem to be a better course. The Lord further assures Arjuna that even if the consequences of one's actions seem to be injurious to others, and the consequences to the organism may seem unfortunate, the basic fact remains that if there was no personal sense of doership involved, there will be no question of incurring any sin. Yad ahankaram ashritya na yotsa iti manyase mithyayusha vyavasayasti prakritistvam niyokshati svabhavajena kamteya nibaddha svena karmana kartum nechasi yanmohat karishyasya vashopitat ishvaras sarvabhutanam hriddeshe arjuna tishtati dhamayan sarvabhutani yantrarudhani mayaya tameva sharanam gaccha sarvabhavena bharata tat prasadat param shantim sthanam prapyasi shashvatam. If in your vanity you decide not to fight, your resolve would be in vain. Your own nature or dharma will drive you to the act. Bound by your own karma, born of your nature, you will do that very thing which your ignorance seeks to avoid. The Lord lives in the heart of every creature. By His Maya, He causes all beings to wander through life as though mounted on a machine. Take refuge utterly in Him. By His grace, you will gain supreme peace and reach the eternal abode. These verses are self-explanatory and need no elaboration. Sarvadharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja aham tva sarvapapebhya mokshayishyami ma shucha. Surrender all your duties to me. Take refuge in me. Fear no longer. I will save you from sin and bondage. This verse is one of the most well-known and at the same time one of the most controversial in the entire Bhagavadgíta. The controversy centers around the interpretation of the first line, Sarvadharman parityajya, abandoning all dharmas. The word dharma is used in the Gita in a number of ways, and thus the controversy. Dharma here simply means concepts and beliefs. This is unfortunate. This controversy is unfortunate because the really meaningful term is surrender to me. The state of self-surrender or the act of taking refuge in the Lord is one and the same for the yogi, the bhakta and the jnani. The yogi merges in the sat aspect of the reality, Satchidananda. The jnani waxes as the chit and the bhakta blooms in the ananda aspect. The main point is that the sense of personal individuality is an independent entity with choice of decision and action has to disappear. The essence of this verse, one of those at the very end, would appear to be to anticipate the final query from Arjuna, who would obviously be confused by the many things he has been told. Arjuna's final query could be, "O Lord, you have deigned to tell me so many things in so many different ways in order to show me the truth, but frankly I am confused. Please tell me in brief terms what I should do, how I should act in life." From this point of view, the verse could be paraphrased as under: forget all you have heard, give up all your beliefs and concepts, and remember only one thing. Consciousness of God is all there is, permeating the smallest particle in the universe. How should you act in this world? Just be totally convinced that you are only an instrument or machine that God operates in order to bring about such actions as He considers fit. A true conviction of this means true surrender to me. Surrender to me in this manner, and then you may act any way you want and live any way you like.